Hey folks, Kevin here. This is what went wrong, an investigation into decreased productivity among some of our beans that we've been growing, our trellis type beans. So if you've been watching our videos over the last couple of years, we love the Cherokee Trailatiers and the Scarlet Red Runner beans. Both of those we grow on both of these hoop trellises. These are cattle panel trellises attached to T-posts. This is smaller in surface area, width-wise, than the one on the West Garden. We've been growing both of these varieties of beans for the last couple of years. And the ones in the West Garden did much better than the ones over here in the East Garden. Now this is October 6th, so I'm cleaning things up, and this last week I harvested the Cherokee Trailatiers from this side of the fence, which was really poor productivity this year, and relatively poor productivity from the Scarlet Red Runner beans as well. Using the same compost from both garden systems, and the Scarlet Red Runners on this side, at this end of the trellis, did much worse than on the more northern. So I'm standing at the southern end of this. Same thing with the Cherokee Trailatiers. Now I've already harvested all of the Cherokee Trailatiers, and I cut off all the bases to examine the soil and the wood chip systems as well. So I ended up coming over here and first starting cutting off all the bases to the Scarlet Red Runner beans, and then I ended up using taking and removing the weed mat. And so hopefully I'm able to show you right now some footage, GoPro footage of the weed mat that I pulled out. So this weed mat is 3 foot wide, and it's the DeWitt weed mat that we like an awful lot. But at the time, a few years ago, when I first installed this system, I burned holes in it. Now there's nothing wrong with burning the holes in the weed mat, but I like the system, a new system that we're doing, where we just put the weed mat right up next to where we're planting the beans. Also, what I had done when I installed this system, because we didn't have enough wood chips at the time when I put the compost down, so I built up the compost similar to the way that it is built up right now, but then I put the weed mats right down on top of the compost, and then I put wood chips on top of the weed mat. And that wasn't a problem as far as weeds growing and all. It was real easy pulling out whatever weeds would start growing down into the wood chips. That's never been an issue. But when you don't have enough wood chips to put the wood chips right next to the weed mat, well, the transfer of nutrients and moisture is slower, and what ends up happening is the wood chips hold so much moisture on the other side of the weed mat that as the slope in the property comes down towards where I'm standing right now, the moisture gets retained much more than at the higher elevation further away from me. And so what we ended up having was we had roots that weren't becoming aerated as well as they should be. You could see the difference in the roots when I actually pulled the roots of the beans out. So unfortunately, the roots didn't get the aeration that they needed to get. The soil didn't drain as well, because what ended up happening was the soil really started building up. I didn't recognize it until I actually started, after I pulled the weed mat up. This whole aisle here, which I drive up and down through, the soils in the last 3 years has built up almost 5 inches thick. So as a result, all of that soil was retaining more moisture. Even during the drought that we had this year, the moisture was being maintained in the deep, rich, thick soil and the wood chips on the outside of the weed mat. And then every time I would water the drip irrigation, and during the drought I saw that they weren't doing as well, so I would come out midday and hit the watering system on, turn on the drip irrigation, and checked it, made sure it was still working, and didn't realize that below the surface of the compost, the soil surface, which was quite deep, just like you could see now, that soil was soaking wet down below instead of getting dried out as I was anticipating potentially could be. So I failed in this situation because I jumped to the wrong conclusion that since we were in a drought, that these plants weren't getting watered very well. Since the water line goes all the way up to the other end, this is a very long trellis bed, and I thought that there just wasn't enough pressure hitting this, so I increased the amount of water. Once pulling the weed mat up, I could really see, oh my goodness, this compost is saturated. The whole area around the base, especially at this end, was much more saturated. And that's the reason, even though the whole trellis didn't do nearly as well as the western bed, this end of the trellis, the lower end of it, where the soil was built up much deeper, did much more poorly than the upper end, which is at the north end, the opposite end of where I'm standing now. So I may show some footage of this right after this. I'm not sure if I will or not, but I hope, and I'll have to look at the old GoPro footage. I shot it, geez, probably a week ago now when I was doing this. But I hope this video is of some value to go ahead and do further investigation than what I was doing, instead of just assuming that the plants weren't getting enough water. They were actually getting more than enough water, to the point where the air, the oxygen, wasn't getting to the roots as they required. So if you found this video informative or valuable, please give us a thumbs up, share it with your friends. Be sure to ask any questions below or leave any comments if you've had similar situations. I'm really interested in what other people have experienced as well. But I know I need to dig a little bit deeper, a little bit earlier in the circumstances, instead of just assuming something like I did this season. So I hope you folks have a super fantastic day, and hopefully you can learn from some of my mistakes. Take care, folks. Bye-bye now.